Okay, so you guys asked for it. Here it is. We have today part two of my Virgo Rising video where I will look at charts of famous people who have Virgo Rising. And I have to say, first of all, that I think one of the issues that I had that slowed me down with making this series of videos is that when it comes to looking at famous natal charts of famous people, that on astro.com, AstroDNist, Astro Databank, they give you a Rodden rating where you, if it's a double A rating, we can be confident that it's good data. However, if we don't have a good rating, we at least have the birthday usually. But in that case, we wouldn't have their rising sign, right? So, in order to have an accurate rising sign, you need to have accurate data. And there's also perhaps something questionable about revealing the. I mean, I don't know. If it's public information, it's public information. But certain people have gone through lengths and measures to keep their astrological data secret so that people do not know what's in their charts and stuff like that. So that I have to admit there may be something questionable about even doing this, and that could also be something to consider moving forward, but I will keep that in mind. And I'm also looking at the list of names that I have assembled here. Certain high ranking officials as Winston Churchill, major players on the cultural scene such as Walt Disney and Steve Jobs, these giants like Disney and Apple, major corporations, not to mention Paul McCartney and Kurt Cobain, pop music giants, Leonard Cohen. But the thing is that I have to admit these are all male names, and I have a shortage of females. I do have Dolly Parton on the list, but I don't really have very many female famous people with Virgo rising on my list here. But I'm just going with this work that I already did 3 years ago, and if you have any suggestions for charts you'd like me to look at, leave them in the comments. So first of all, first on the list we have Steve Jobs. Um, Now I'm gonna be probably just showing these whole sign houses. So any Deborah Holding fans out there, you're gonna have to get used to it. Sorry. Um, the so Steve Jobs, first of all, let's break it down here. The guy has Sun in Pisces, which is suitable for the fact that it's Pisces season, I would say, and he's got Virgo rising. It's in the seventh house, which, if this is one of the things I would like to point out here, in the tension between whole sign houses and Placidus or quadrant based house systems, is that it's true that in this chart, Steve Jobs has a seventh house, but if you notice the position of the ascendant at 22 degrees Virgo, and the line there that indicates the descendant position, which is not really that. I will maybe highlight. I don't know what I'll do with this in the editing. I do not have a large budget for post production, so you're gonna have to bear with me here. But the uh, the point here is that we can see that the sun of Steve Jobs is quite a ways below the horizon. So it's the seventh house is a house which is defined by the setting sun, and in a way, I would actually argue that the seventh house sun of Steve Jobs is fitting because it involves the kind of, it's almost a ceremonial quality, the way that he'd give the way he'd give those presentations, like the big announcements for the Apple products. It had the idea of everyone has assembled for as a kind of a ceremonial announcement, and people also often remarked on the kind of religiosity, the kind of creepy corporate religiosity of Apple products. And um that, could also go with the ceremonial aspect of the seventh house. And but this thing also about, you know in our culture, work is seen as a virtue, and if you were using a Placidus system, the the sixth house would be kind of like the service, or him being a hard worker or something like that. But there's something about the fact that the seventh house, the sun is already below the horizon, is already dipped down into the underworld, suggests, I am trying to suggest that there's more there, that 5 degree sun in Pisces with the descendant at 22 degrees, right? That's more than 15 degrees away from the descendant. More than 15, that's, to be exact, that would be 17 degrees below the horizon. I would venture to argue that 17 degrees below the horizon, in a sense, this is one of the things, I think the tension between whole sign and Placidus is that I think that there could be an argument to be made that this is a bit of a seventh house sun and it's a bit of a sixth house sun. That there is something sixth housey about it, but we respect the fact that the angle is is not the same as the house cusp exactly. It's still seventh house, but it's towards sixth house territory, right? So there's a certain, you're getting my perspective on how I would read this, but I would say it's irrelevant to spend so much time on the delineating what house designation we get, if this is going to be 6 or 7, and considering that descendant degree, right? You will also notice that the moon in this chart is in Aries, which is only one sign ahead of the sun, meaning that Steve Jobs is. It's interesting because sometimes you may see as very prominent figures as being a full moon, a culmination of their potential, whereas Steve Jobs, the beginning degree is kind of like the first steps of pioneering a new era kind of thing, right? Of introducing the iPhone, introducing something, right? That we can read that into the lunar cycle. However, it's interesting to see that the moon is in the 8th house, which is, of course, Steve Jobs. It was also interesting that Steve Jobs obviously has passed away, and the 8th house, indicative of death and what comes of the wealth that comes after death, is that the Apple people, probably profiting a lot off of Steve Jobs to this day from his inventions, right? The moon in the 8th, the people, your affiliates, your company, your associates, profiting off of your death, perhaps. With the Mars there, in the inevitable conjunction of the moon and Mars within Aries, the Mars at the killing degree of the 29th. Maybe a little, who knows, right? But interesting stuff. Another interesting thing, while we're on the topic of this, Mars is opposite Neptune, and what a fitting chart to do during this Mars square Neptune that we're going through right now. And the Jupiter is conjunct Uranus in Cancer, which is another cool. This actually reminds me of my dad. Has a very similar. My dad was actually born really near Steve Jobs. My dad's got a similar chart to this guy. Although my dad was an Aquarius, right? But you just, wind it back a month. This is my dad's chart. It's kind of funny now that I noticed it. But that Jupiter and Uranus conjunction, I recognize from my dad's chart. And you've got that opposing Venus. Look, Jupiter obviously in 11th, exalted Jupiter, nice Jupiter in Cancer, and Uranus has to do with technological innovation, has to do with revolutionizing the technological industry, and both of those planets are opposing Venus in Capricorn. Big money visas Capricorn, 5th house, the fruits of your labor, bearing fruit, Venus, flowers and stuff. It all goes together, in my mind anyways. And 21-degree Saturn in Scorpio trining that um, Jupiter. A nice, it's good to have some contact there, and that's going to be creating a grand water trine with his sun, although it's not the most, the sun isn't exactly in that trine very, in a good orb though, but whatever, it still works by sign. Okay. Um, and you could also Mercury in Aquarius 6th house. If we just keep the whole sign thing and not get too hung up on that whole sign Placidus stuff, this that could also work as service in the technological, it's in the middle decan of Aquarius, right? And what tarot card is associated with that? The Six of Swords. The very technological base decan in the Aleister Crowley Thoth deck. That's associated with science, actually, right? Science and technology. There you go. Bada bing, bada boom. There's Steve Jobs. Now we're going to do who's next? Oh man, Kurt Cobain. Well, I don't know if I'm gonna. Well, how many of these I'm gonna do before I get tired? Let's do Kurt. Let's just try a bit. Okay, so interestingly enough, Kurt Cobain also has Jupiter in Cancer. Look at this. Okay, suitable maybe for what we're going through right now, as if it wasn't emo enough. We've got Kurt Cobain, the proto emo rock star. He died so that people could wear fishnets on their hands. Basically, that was the kind of how the '90s went. Was the death of Kurt Cobain gave birth to a whole legion of eyeliner makeup skater boys and whatever punk rock prom queens. No, that was Avril Lavigne. Sorry, it's easy to mistake them because they're so similar, obviously, right? But no, Kurt Cobain has more punk cred, and he's a Seattle native. Well, West Coast, anyways. It's very wet around here on the West Coast, so maybe the indicative of the watery, sappy, wet West Coast boy having the soppy, wet five. Well, if you count Chiron as a planet, 5 planet stellium in Pisces there. And in the 7th house, again, we got this is similar to Steve Jobs in that the ceremonial performance of a rock concert versus Steve Jobs is doing almost like a rock concert performance launching tech devices, right? Of that kind of theatrical quality. And then you also have that supported by strong 11th house things and by some banging Scorpio placements. Check out that Mars and Scorpio in a perfect trine to Kurt Cobain's perfect trine from Mars and Scorpio to Sun and Scorpio in Pisces. And then trining his moon and Jupiter. It's actually a really similar chart to Steve Jobs in that they've got these grand water trines and in a Virgo rising chart, right? So that you can see some pattern for success when you take Virgo, the earthy. Well, I don't. He's according to this chart, Kurt Cobain has this Uranus Pluto thing on the ascendant, which is that's pretty punk rock. If Uranus Pluto is pretty rebellious, kind of that would be like the anarchy cheerleader, smells like Teen Spirit kind of punk rock rebellious attitude, and that is in opposition to his Venus and Pisces. Oh man, like of course you're gonna be making a smash out hit with that kind of stuff in it, but that Venus is running into Saturn, bummer, and yeah, we all know how it goes with Kurt Cobain. Sorry. But funny enough, the 8th house is empty, right? That Steve Jobs has more of an 8th house thing going on than Kurt Cobain. How about that, hey? That was probably because Apple iPhones are making more money after his death than, the who's making money off of Nirvana music versus who's making money off of Apple. Where's the money? maybe that's the 8th house. What is it? It's ruled by Mars, which is in Mars and Scorpio, 3rd house. So it could be like that. Could be like a Dave Grohl or something like that kind of influence, right? Like the bandmates of Nirvana might be indicative of that Mars and Scorpio third house influence, maybe. Because I think you could also say that the 11th. What do you think your band is? If this is Kurt Cobain, where's Dave Grohl? Is Dave Grohl going to be in the 11th, or is Dave Grohl going to be in the third? Right? I would say their drummer is kind of like your bro, right? Your bros are going to be in your third house, right? Maybe not the 11th house is more going to be more like your agent or your manager or something, right? Or and then Courtney Love is there with that Venus Saturn conjunction or something in seventh, right? But Dave Grohl's probably the Mars and Scorpio, heading, or is Dave Grohl the Jupiter and Cancer, getting lucky there? Maybe Dave Grohl's the Jupiter in Cancer. That makes more sense because that's his how he reaches the goals afterwards, right? I don't know. Well, here's some. Okay, what's coming up next? We got. Should we go straight to Paul McCartney after this? Why not? Maca. Whoa, Jupiter in Cancer, 3 for 3, and Venus and Taurus, nice little Venus and Taurus there. Good for a musician. Um, Maca's got a Gemini stellium, and he's got a Sun square to Neptune. Oh my God. Like, the Neptune squares are coming in strong today. I don't know what to say about this. He's got Neptune on the ascendant, if this is a accurate reading, accurate chart. So Neptune, as we know, Paul McCartney did all the Acid, the Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. He did the Journey to India. He did the Revolution #9. I am the Eggman. I am the Walrus. Cuckoo, Cachoo. Right? Where do you think that came from? A Neptune on the ascendant, no doubt. We don't have no mystery there. Got that one sorted. And Venus in the Taurus is in 19 degrees, so it's not a very tight trine, but it doesn't hurt to have a nicely, Venus in good dignity in trining that Neptune, even if it's not a very tight aspect. But we can probably do better than that. We've got a sextile though from the Venus to the Moon. But that's in the 12th house. Well, they say the 12th house is good for being plugged into the collective, man. Plugged into the current of where the kids are at, right? They're into the hip new stuff, the Beatles. Obviously, I'm plugged into where the kids are at if I'm talking about boomer music, though. But you got Mars conjunct Pluto in Leo. I think I did something where there's an issue where if you look at George Harrison, again, in context to a Virgo Rising, who are the bros for the Virgo Rising is going to be Scorpio, and George Harrison is a Scorpio Rising, or he's kind of got some Scorpio stuff going on, and that Mars and Pluto was squaring some stuff in George Harrison's chart, I remember, and that's something to pay attention to. There's some conflicts between the royal fixed signs, as they would say. Although we're not going to do George Harrison today, but that's just something that comes to mind when I'm talking about Paul McCartney. And the whole thing about perhaps the downfall of the Beatles, could be somewhat indicative of the lineup of planets in the 12th house, because the 12th house is the house of self-undoing. And so, but there's also the 10th house is a very the leadership quality, that stacked 10th, and the 11th helping out, and for all this kind of stuff, and the 9th house being good for that visionary psychedelic quality, and the support to that moon in the 12th, that even when it goes wrong, it's kind of a cool experiment for Paul McCartney, we can see. And he did some pretty cool experimental albums, even his stuff that is maybe not as polished or successful. I actually respect Paul McCartney as a musician quite a bit. So there you go. There's 3 Virgo bros for you. And I'm tired now of talking, so I'm going to take a break. And if you have any requests for other Virgo rising charts, let me know. And if you want to give me money, even I don't even I don't even say about how many synthesizers I own. You probably shouldn't give me money. I'm only going to buy more synthesizers actually. So don't even think about it. But if you wanted to, there's ways to do that, and I do offer services in exchange for funding. It's true. I've been known to do it from time to time. If you would like to support me, maybe we can work something out. Just letting you know. Or you can like and subscribe, etc. Thank you very much for watching.